Let's go to the city of Minerva, which was protected by two branches of a river. Every year, Pope Innocent III insisted on calling crusades from the north against the Languedoc, which attracted more and more people anxious for lands and properties and for indulgences to obtain forgiveness of crimes. Once their 40 days of enlistment was expired, the Crusaders returned with their spoils or remained as lords of the lands they had conquered. This happened especially with the lesser-ranking nobles, who, because they were not first-born sons, could not receive a material inheritance. The Pope acted as the true Lord of Europe, confiscating the properties of those who refused to acknowledge him as the vicar of the Son of God. The Pope distributed the lands to those who recognized his supremacy. Thus were fulfilled the words of the prophet Daniel in reference to the future papal power. He will attack the mightiest fortresses and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people and will distribute the land at a price. Daniel 11, verse 39. The Crusaders, commanded by Simon of Montfort, the new lord of the Languedoc, destroyed vineyards and bird plantations, impoverishing the regions of their ancient lord, who now fought as princes without titles or lands or properties. In the summer of 1210, attention turned to Minerva, another notable fortress, which is cut through by the river Lasses, forming a large canyon. The rocky mountain upon which the castle was built bore the effects of centuries of rain. The surrounding mountains are higher than Minerva, like in Cabaret or Lastur, but the castle is full of homes and buildings of stone, so that it is not possible to see from the other mountains what is done within. Tourists are invited to come and drink their fill of wine to a wine bar. What a flimsy testimony from a place once consecrated by noble and pure people who preferred to fast and not yield to the perverted appetites. William was the lord of Minerva and professed openly the faith of the despicable Cathars. The fortress of Minerva is still inhabited today and may be accessed by a high medieval bridge. A second access to the fortress is possible through one of the mountains, which is connected to the castle through a narrow pass. That second access was blocked at the time of the Crusades by a strong wall without windows. The Friends of God preachers came to that fortress seeking refuge because it looked strong enough to withstand the infamous cruelty which thundered from Rome and was incarnated in Simon of Montfort and the local bishops. On June 15, 1210, the forces of Simon of Montfort reached Minerva. The encampment of the Crusaders looked like a miserable hovel, with people scrounging to obtain wood and straw for protection from the sun. They were pressed to take the city before the hot summer reached its peak. At that time, the French army had developed a machine of destruction capable of throwing huge stones a greater than normal distance. The principal machine was called Malvoisin. Evil neighbor is the meaning. With that machine, the Crusaders were hammering the walled stair which led to the river, and where another wall protected the water well from the archers who could send a rain of arrows unto those who went down looking for water. If those who were within the wall lost access to those water wells, there was no hope of outlasting the siege. The besieged Cathars had to destroy that trebuchet called Malvoisin in French. One night, toward the end of June, a few men from the castle came down and climbed the other side of the canyon. They surprised the few who were manning the trebuchet and set it on fire. But one of the seized men yelled before dying, alarming the rest of the crusade. The Malvoisin was saved. The narrators don't tell us if those who staged the attack made it back to the fortress. William of Minerva at last knew that he had to negotiate surrender or die of thirst with the entire city. After a period of hesitation, he offered Simon of Montfort all of his lands and castles in return for a small village in a nearby valley. Simon of Montfort agreed not to kill the inhabitants of the city. But the papal legate, Arnold Amaury, the same papal legate who had ordered the death of all 20,000 inhabitants of Béziers, leaving God to sort out the Catholics from the Cathars, arrived just on the eve of its capitulation, requiring all the inhabitants of the city to swear loyalty to the Roman Catholic Church and to recant of their heretical faith. Amaury assured the Crusaders that only few would recant. He was right. Only 3 women preachers recanted, being regarded with compassion by her sisters who preferred to die before denying the Lord who died for them. They remembered the words of Jesus. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. Matthew 16, verse 25. 140 preachers, friends of God, were tied to stakes and set on fire at the end of the canyon, though an inscription of the church in the city affirms that they died at the doors of the temple. One of them replied to a priest who admonished him to recant. No death, no life can separate us from the faith where we are united. Life for them made sense only in connection with their message as an opportunity to prepare souls for heaven. They remember the words of Jesus. Everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father in heaven. Matthew 10, verses 32 and 33. Let's go now to the city of Termes. Look at the distance, the castle of Termes. Look at the forest, the mountains, the places where the friends of God fled to find peace and protection. The enemies of them came to here to destroy them. The next move for Simon of Montfort was to take Termes, another place considered impregnable. The siege lasted between 7 and 9 months. For the last 4 months, the Catholic priest of Paris, called William, led the infernal attack to take the city. The hot, dry summer exhausted the water reserves, leaving them only 2 or 3 more months of wine, which would not be enough to survive. However, the Crusaders were not in good condition either. They had been decimated by the Count of Cabaret, who fell upon their rear guard and destroyed part of the machinery used to assault the walled cities. They were also demoralized and at the point of returning because the reinforcements of Germany were not coming. Then an unexpected rain came, which led the besieged people to gather water in barrels and tanks that they failed to clean properly. Women used that water to make bread and cook with it, which caused many to contract dysentery. Thus, they attempted to flee during the night, probably through a secret tunnel or another space that was found, and they could escape, accepting the Lord. They brought nothing but money. Their count returned to secure some prized possessions and was discovered. He apparently forgot the advice of Jesus to his followers not to return with anything in the city when they would see Jerusalem surrounded by the Roman troops. Simon of Montfort brought the count to Carcassonne and placed him in a dungeon where he died 3 years later. The Crusaders also killed the Catalans and the mercenaries of Aragon who had come to support the resistance and had remained awaiting the return of the Count for the castle. Now let us go to the capitulations and situation of Toulouse. The fall of Termes, plus a succession of hangings and burnings at the stake, led to other capitulations, including Cabaret. The violent piety of the Roman Catholic Church, which took possession of the principal castles of the Languedoc, seemed impossible to stop. For this reason, many friends of God were seeing that it was better to take refuge in the mountains and the secluded forest. Even so, the time of test would come to them too, with the course of inquisition that Rome was setting up to extirpate any vestige of personal friendship of God. Everything now indicated who would be next. Toulouse, a city near Carcassonne, which competed with Rome in population, was counted among the 3 greatest cities of Europe. Arnold Amaury, the papal prelate, excommunicated the Count of Toulouse in September 1209 for not removing Jews from administrative positions and for not expelling the despised Cathars from his territory. He also placed a ban on the city. This meant that there would be no more religious services or baptisms or extreme unction or Catholic burial in that city. Bishop Fulk of Tolosa poisoned the atmosphere by threatening the city with the fires of hell, threats more worthy of the Koran than the Bible. He attacked the Jews and the Cathars, accusing them of being usurers because they didn't condemn capitalism within the city and permitted business and the accumulation of wealth. But everyone knew that the same bishop became extremely rich and that he and other priests coveted the money and properties of both Jews and Cathars. Let us keep in mind that the Roman Catholic Church believed money as well as women to be sinful and a symbol of corruption, even as she required and retained a large sum of taxes. Simon of Montfort even required an additional tax in the Languedoc, specifically for the Pope. And it is well known how the clergy abused the other so-called symbol of moral corruption. Since their preaching could not win many converts, Bishop Fulk organized a paramilitary religious militia called the White Brotherhood, which bore large white crosses upon black robes. That militia walked in procession in the light of torches through the street of Toulouse, attacking prominent Jewish and Cathar houses. A black brotherhood was formed to counteract the White Brotherhood. Both brotherhoods ended up terrorizing the people of Toulouse, so that Bishop Fulk preached the need to eliminate Jews and Cathars to bring peace to the city. 3 times, Raymond of Toulouse was excommunicated. In addition, Bishop Full required him to leave the walls of the city so that the priest could be free from the pestilential odor of an excommunicated ruler and be dressed with the sanctified odor of the priesthood. He constantly threatened the count in public. Good morning. We are in Labor. It's cold this morning. But here in this place, about 400 people were burned at the stake at once. And at the same time, more people were hanged. We used to speak about the jihad or holy war of Muslims harangued by their prophet Muhammad. But the concept of holy war also infected the papacy, which called for crusades of extermination. That holy war approached Toulouse when Simon of Montfort decided to invade Labor in April of 1211. Bishop Peter of Namur joined his brother William, who, despite being Archbishop of Paris, was expert in the use of the machinery for attacking the medieval walled cities. Domingo of Guzman, friend of Simon of Montfort and founder of the Dominican order, as well as first inquisitor, was present at the siege of the city. Labor was protected by the river Agut and the top of a small mountain at the other extreme. Hundreds of the White Brotherhood took their place upon the hill, opposing the city to sing hymns under the direction of Bishop Fulk. The songs reminded the dwellers of the city of what had happened to the 20,000 people living in Béziers. The siege lasted longer than expected because the troops of Simon of Montfort had been reduced by an unexpected attack from Count Raymond Roger of Foix. In an ambush, Raymond of Foix fell upon the long line of crusaders who were coming from Germany, killing many of them. When the forces of Simon came to help the Germans, the troop of Raymond of Foix had fled, and what he could not complete was being achieved by the people in the villages with knives and sticks. On May 3, 1211, Father William was able to open a breach in the walls of Labor, and the city was seized. 80 knights of Labor were hanged, without respect for the conventional rules of war at that time, and Geralda, an Albigensian lady, was considered the noblest and most respected lady of the Languedoc for her hospitality and generosity toward the poor. After hanging her brother before her, Simon of Montfort gave her to the soldiers to be sexually abused. Then he threw her into a well which he covered with stones. Historians agree that the act was shocking even for the norms of that time. 400 preachers wrongly called perfects were burned together at the stake in the greatest stake known to humanity during the Middle Ages, while the White Brotherhood of Bishop Full sang a Te Deum. The only remains of the historic Labor today are an old tower which is found at the entrance of the fortress and a monument in the high square before the river. The mayor of the city used some years ago to offer a special ceremony each year in the month of May in memory of the Cathars. At the base of the monument, there is an inscription in French and in the Occitan language, a remembrance of the noble widow Geralda and of the bloody work of the invaders upon the Cathar populations. No one knows today the exact location of the well where that notable daughter of God died, but it will soon be revealed and her bones dressed with immortality at the coming of the Lord. The 400 preachers who were burned alive together will also be found to glorify the Lord eternally in his kingdom, according to what John saw in vision, chapter 7, verses 14 and 15. Let us consider now sexual purity in the context of immorality. The friends of God required sexual purity. They condemned immorality at a time when corruption was general among the Catholic clergy and the papacy. The Roman clergy sold indulgences. Bishops sold holy oil and relics and assigned penances as arbitrarily as if by the roll of dice. Others opened taverns using the clerical collars of their institution. Nuns organized feasts and erred during the night in the streets. Religious orders, males as well as females, took lovers, etc. This was the darkest hour of the papacy, when pontiffs succeeded each other with astonishing frequency, and when popes and bishops had become feudal lords, expert in every worldly intrigue. This is a very well-known testimony for historians. Corruption reigned in the highest offices of the Church. This was known by the Roman clergy and proved helpful in detecting presumed Cathar heretics as they displayed a resistance to being corrupted. On one occasion, near Reims, a clergyman named Gervasio of Tilbury rode with the archbishop and some prelate lords. He found a pretty girl who was working in a vineyard. The clergyman spoke to her gallantly of the pleasures of love. She looked the other way and replied that she would remain always a virgin. The clergyman insisted, but she stood firm, saying that her body should not be corrupted. This attracted the attention of the archbishop, who was shocked, not by the immoral behavior of the clergy, but by the faith of the young lady. He ordered her arrest and took her to Reims to interrogate her. The young lady refused to recant and was subsequently burned at the stake. When Saint Bernard went to southern France in 1147 for the purpose of converting the Albigenses, he concluded that their customs are irreproachable. They don't do anybody any harm, nor eat their bread in laziness, and believe men are to live only from work. If you ask for their faith, he said, it is absolutely Christian. If you hear their speech, there is nothing more innocent. Their acts are in harmony with their words. Another means of detecting both Cathars and Jews was by their diet. While the Jews didn't eat pork, the friends of God were easier to discern because they didn't eat meat, nor anything derived from eggs or milk. They didn't eat meat because they believed that meat awakens sexual passion. This didn't prevent them from procreating or cause them to oppose the perpetuation of life. Many modern vegetarians count the Albigenses among their ideological ancestors today and have identified with them in the vindication of their choice of diet. Peter of Aragon was horrified by the barbarism of Simon of Montfort and the bloody cruelty of Arnold and Maury, the papal legate. Under such terrible circumstances, he convinced the Princess of Languedoc to receive him as king of that region. But on May 21st, 1213, the Christian world received a letter from Pope Innocent III which reinstated a crusade against heretics, thus choosing the spiritual order, the Church, war and bloodshed over tolerance and peace, and the common good of the inhabitants of the Languedoc. The fact that a devoted Catholic king like Peter of Aragon did not comply with the papal order is another proof that the horrific crimes of the papacy were not the result of the time, but rather a cruel and bloody time orchestrated by the papacy. We regularly discover historians who affirm that the crimes committed by the Catholic hordes with the support of stimulus of the popes were shocking even for the conventional norms of that time. The proof is that even the most devout Catholics complied with the inhuman measures coming from Rome. Peter of Aragon devoted his kingdom to the Church and regularly sent sizable contributions to the papacy. Nothing remains of the old city of Toulouse but a few stones of the wall. In order to seize it, Bishop Full promised the Crusaders that if they died in the battle, they would go directly to heaven, something similar to what the Quran promises to Muslims when they proclaim the jihad or holy war. The Crusaders murdered Peter of Aragon in an unexpected move, and the southern troops fled in terror. Simon of Montfort then perpetrated a massacre similar to that of Bessières. Thousands of wounded people were slaughtered by the bloodiest man that had ever settled in those lands. Raymond of Toulouse fled to England with his son under the protection of the English king. Pope Innocent III paid no attention to the protest of the Albigensian princes who reported the tremendous wealth made by the Bishop of Toulouse, while condemning the freedom Jews and Cathars to conduct business. That pope approved the intensification of the hunt for heretics in the famous Fourth Lateran Council. He also nominated Simon of Montfort as a faithful son of the Church to be lord of all the Languedoc, with Toulouse as his capital. This endowed Simon of Montfort with more lands than the King of France. Let us reconsider the words of the prophet Daniel, who said, in a reference to that pretentious religious bishop of Rome, "He will attack the mightiest fortresses and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people and will distribute the land at a price." The medieval Christian world seemed to be submitted to the will of a master of intrigue. The prophet had foretold it with such amazing precision. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many. Daniel 8, verses 23 to 25. The same Lateran Council, led by Innocent III, anathemized the British barons who had uttered the famous Magna Carta. It was required also that the Jews of Europe must bear a distinctive yellow circle on their robes to avoid making the mistake of accepting them as first-class citizens in medieval politics. Adolf Hitler adopted that custom with the Jews of Poland at the beginning of the Second World War. As a Catholic, Hitler was a faithful heir of the anti-Jewish tradition of Rome.